Okay, we have 70 people online. We can start.
Thank you and good afternoon, colleagues. Welcome to this all ever important online launch of the findings report on perceptions and attitudes relating to climate change and the just transition in South Africa. My name is Blessing Manale. I'm responsible. I head communications, outreach, and stakeholder engagement at the Presidential Climate Commission, and I'll be co-facilitating this 2-hour but fascinating and well-awaited for webinar. Mine is to, for now, welcome you, but to briefly say that we've got quite a very broad and diverse panel. We'll start with some opening remarks as well as an overview of the survey, followed by key findings from the top research team, as well as reflection from the stakeholders on the key findings, being the PCC commissioners themselves, the National Union of Mine Workers, the South African Transport and Allied Workers Union, as well as a representative of young people or youth. And we'll have about 40 minutes of interactive discussion with you participating online. But let me say that those that may not have the opportunity to speak or they might be camera shy, you are all welcome to put in your comments on the chats. If you've got any links we'd like to put in for further consideration or for keeping the dialogue going on, you'll proceed. But the ground rules are simple. I will keep your microphones off during the presentation and you raise your hand to speak and would unmute you and recognize you during the interactive sessions. Otherwise, you are welcome. And I would like to, before I call upon, but let me say most importantly, we've got quite a number of prominent persons on our list. I would observe protocol and recognize the Chief Executive Officer of the Human Sciences Research Council, Professor Sarah Masweta, as well as the key research team. But I think after the opening remarks by the Executive Manager for Policy and Research in the PCC, Ms. Lebogang Molaisi, I would introduce the HSRC CEO much more appropriately. With that, I don't know, Yuri, if you'd like to say something before we hand over to Ms. Molaisi from the Policy and Research Unit of the PCC to formally open. Yuri?
Thanks, Blessing. Just to welcome everyone. And I think you've covered it all. I'll take over a bit later. Thanks.
Thank you very much, colleagues. I don't want to spoil the show. I've got my own heart beats and hyped up about the report because it really affects the work and the work we do in the Commission around awareness and outreach. But let me right away give over to Ms. Lebogang Molaisi, Executive responsible for Policy and Research, to welcome us, tantalize our taste buds about what to expect, and then we'll move over to the core of the report. Ms. Molaisi, and everybody, once again, welcome to those online, to those that are not able to interact. Lebo, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Blessing, and thanks to Yuri. First of all, to everyone that's here, I'd like to welcome all of you to the PCC's launch of the high-level findings report on public perceptions and attitudes relating to climate change and the just transition. I do want to also take this opportunity to welcome all of the participants that will be participating in today's program. A special welcome to the PCC commissioners that are on the call today, but particularly those that participate in the monitoring and evaluation working group of the PCC, where this work actually emanates from. I think it's safe to say that we are thrilled to be launching the first ever nationally representative survey on the just transition in South Africa. This survey presents a critical baseline of what South Africans think about climate change and the just transition. In embarking on this exercise, more than 3,000 South Africans from around the country were asked about how climate change is impacting their lives and livelihoods and their attitudes towards policies that will support a just and equitable transition. I think out of interest, I was particularly drawn to some of the results in terms of just transition awareness and beliefs. And I think I was quite keen on just how many of the respondents were aware about, you know, the transition to other energy sources. And I think what we can take away there is that on average, it's either people know very little or nothing about the actual transition. And then it becomes a bit more stark when the question is posed in terms of the knowledge of the actual term, the just transition. I think overwhelming majority of people indicating that they have not heard the term just transition. The actual team that did the work will get into the actual nitty-gritties and the numbers. I'm just doing a quick high level of some of the things that really captured my attention. I think it was really interesting when looking at the perceived negative elements of a just transition. And people are worried about, you know, whether a transition to a low carbon economy will mean that they'll have to pay more for electricity. People are worried about the loss of jobs and worsening of an energy security crisis, which I think are understandable key concerns, and I think people are well aware of that. On the opposite side, when asked about perceived positive elements of a just transition, people seem to be aware of the fact that, you know, there is opportunities for the economy to grow, and there is opportunities for people's health to improve. I think that was an interesting recognition, and the potential reduction of load shedding, which I think was very interesting to note. So overall, I think what we can say is that, you know, even though people do not necessarily know what the term just transition is, they are aware of, you know, some of the just transition policies and how these policies can lead to a better life for all. So people are very keen on issues related to job creation, diversification of our economy, seizing the new manufacturing of opportunities, yes, the creation of new jobs, and people look forward to this. I think where we can bolster our communication efforts is how this all ties back to a just transition and is actually a part of a just transition to a low carbon economy. So having noted that so few people understand the term the just transition, I think this also goes to the work of the Presidential Climate Commission. And I think these are the things that we take to heart, especially when commissioning work of this sort. So I think even after the HSRC team has done their presentation, I'm equally keen to hear the stakeholder sort of responses from the results and recommendations emanating from this report, because it'll also give us a sense of, you know, are the results really sort of like the key questions and key concerns emanating from our society, and we can get better insight on that. I think I would be amiss if I didn't indicate that, you know, it's been a pleasure collaborating with the Human Science Research Council in collecting this information and in this endeavor. And I think I speak on behalf of the Executive Director of the PCC who couldn't join us here today to say that, you know, we do look forward to strengthening this collaboration moving forward, because what it does do is it is a dipstick, or it gives us a litmus test of whether our work is having the impact that it's meant to on the ground, and if ordinary citizens on the ground understand the work of a just transition. No one is here to listen to me talk today, so I'm going to keep it at this and hand back to Blessing, and just wishing you and wishing everyone here today successful deliberations, and we're keen to learn more.
Thank you very much, Lebo, for that elaborate introduction of the project and what and what it has taken us to get this far. But as I said, mine is to briefly facilitate. I would love to take this opportunity to actually call upon our key partner to just provide an overview of the work the HSRC does in this area, as well as particularly the survey that, and for me, it's beyond partnering. I think the HSRC just came on board and saved us all in the heat and misses we're undergoing with other areas where we needed information in a sense of scientific-based information. Colleagues, I've also seen the participants are quite a broad variety of participants: government, the media, the community and civil society organization, independent consultants. So I'm sure that all of you are in the business of climate action, and that's why you've called them on board. But I'm sure when we get into the discussion, we would have a sense of what brings us together. But let me introduce to you, ladies and gentlemen, quickly, friends, comrades, to Professor Sarah Musweta, who's the current Chief Executive Officer of the Human Sciences Research Council. She holds a doctorate in sociology, and she's also Associate Professor at the University of Wits, where she got the same. And she's written elaborately on quite a lot of transformational issues. The one of her greatest writings is Eating from One Pot: Dynamics on Survival in Poor South African Households. She has worked in various organizations. She's a member of the BRICS Think Tank Council, and she sits in the Council of the University of Venda. She sits in the National Minimum Wage Commission, and she has worked in the HSRC for quite some time, and as well as the Development Bank of Southern Africa. So you can see with her footprint that she has literally worked in all the areas where the Climate Commission has got a footprint and an interest, or whether it's interface with climate action or just transition. So I'm sure we've selected quite a very, very biased partner looking into your profile, Prof. And without much ado, welcome, and please share with us your thoughts in the next 10 minutes on why we're here today. Welcome.
Thanks, Blessing. I think I should have given strict instructions to just give a one-liner. It's Sarah Musweta. I work for the Human Sciences Research Council, and thank you very much for this. And Lebo, thank you. I was listening very closely to how passionate you take this work, and it's something that the PCC and as well as HSRC we share in common, and this is why we're here. Allow me, distinguished guests, to say good afternoon to all of you. It is an honor to be here. I'm super excited. Thank you very much for joining this important webinar. It's not just an ordinary webinar. We are launching one of our important many work that we have worked on for many months, and it is exciting for us to be here. My colleagues are here, and they're going to take you through the key findings of this important work. I would like to think, Lebo, this is one of the most unique research work that has ever taken place in this country, and I'm looking forward for us to continue partnering and work and expanding this work. Let me just say a couple of things, knowing again that my colleagues will take you through the detail, the fascinating detail. I don't want to steal their thunder. I know that they've worked very tirelessly on this, and I think it also is testament to the kind of work and caliber that exists inside HSRC. This is, of course, a webinar. We are launching an important survey, like many of our many surveys inside HSRC. This is very close to my heart, given the raging debate about climate change and environmental challenges that affect us. But it's more than that. It is also a celebration of our partnership as HSRC with PCC. It is also testament to what happens when two key institutions in this country, when we come together for a common purpose for our country, and I also want to say for the continent and the world. This is what happens when we all come together for the good of our country. And this collaboration, I think today, is for me another example of what happens when, as South Africans, we come together and as institutions we pool resources and we focus. It is also, I think, for me, the third thing that is important, and that is testament to what HSRC is about and should be about, which is evidence-based research that influences policy. Many a times we bemoan on how some of the policy in the world, not in South Africa, how in the world we come up with some misfit policies, and it is precisely because they are not evidence based on research. So it is heartwarming for me always to be a member and a full citizen of this country, and appreciate how we take research seriously. And I'm particularly pleased with how PCC we are moving on with that in mind of taking research seriously and partnering with credible institutions. Of course, credible here is HSRC. The findings themselves are groundbreaking, and I think as you would hear from my colleagues as they take you through some of what the work that we have done. Groundbreaking in terms of content, one, and which is important in us not fudging the data. That data will speak for itself. And sometimes when I look at the data, I'm thinking, oh, do we really want to say 45% or 20% people know what climate change is, given where we are at as planet Earth? But it is findings. We're not in the business of fudging evidence. We tell it like it is, even though it will be uncomfortable. But I think it is groundbreaking, given that this is a first of its kind. And what we want to do is monitor these perceptions over time. One of our surveys in the HSRC is 20 years old, from where we started with the first survey on HIV and AIDS to where we are now. Even a survey on innovation. I mean, I think that says a lot about progress, even in perceptions and understanding of certain things. Climate change seemingly is also a new phenomenon for some communities, some individuals to grasp. But knowing where we've come from innovation to HIV and AIDS, to many other surveys that we have done inside HSRC, we are optimistic that if we take this data seriously, we will be able to get to a particular point where we are extremely proud of South Africans knowing and grasping the magnitude of this. The second thing why this is groundbreaking for us as HSRC, and this is again something that I take enormous pride as being a member and an employee, a staff member at HSRC, is our methodologies. I think many times I've seen surveys in many parts of the world where we prioritize certain voices, and certain voices are not heard, even on matters that affect individuals. And in this case, our community lens in our methodology is important, and it has guided all the work that we are doing. It should guide all the work that we are doing as well moving forward. But it has also been very strong here for this survey. So it is exciting times in that sense. Why is also exciting for me? Oftentimes when we talk about climate change, just transition, many times it has always been at the policymakers' platforms. We hear their voices, the elite, like some of us, government, academics, even our comrades in the unions, and less attention has been paid in terms of even the dialogue or even hearing them through research. Our communities, I think less has been happening in that space, and this is why I want again to congratulate PCC for also sharing that vision with us of hearing an ordinary citizen's voice and perspective on a significant matter such as climate change and just transition and environment challenges. Let me say this, and I think we share this with all of you as our distinguished guest today in this webinar, that climate change is indeed an environmental challenge. But it is more than that. We know that. It is more than that. It is a significant, a profound socioeconomic issue. It affects livelihoods. It affects livelihoods. It also affects the quality of life. So we are not just talking about climate change. We're not just studying from HSRC side, studying climate change. We're not just having this conversation about climate change and just transition. We know that it has a direct correlation, to use that phrase, direct correlation to the quality of life, to the livelihoods of individuals, and those who cannot afford secure livelihoods, sustainable livelihoods, remain the ones who are heavily impacted with the adverse effects of environmental changes, climate change, just transition. So for us, it is important that as we think about climate change through research, through collaborations and partnership with PCC, that we take our communities along this journey. Right, their perceptions and the meanings that they attach to their world around environmental challenges is important for us to note. Otherwise, we are going to come up with policy prescripts and recommendations that are devoid from the realities, or on as they say, on the ground. And why are perceptions important? For us, public perceptions is important for various reasons. As I said, I think it is important as a link to responsive policy outcomes. For this particular research that we've conducted, for us, it is about building social consensus. There's no point in us as government, as unions, as academics, to always be talking about what the effects of environmental challenges and what needs to be done, and we don't take our communities along in what needs to be done. In actual fact, what needs to be done in all spaces is not in our ivory tower offices. It's in those communities, and we'll be surprised at how much communities don't necessarily talk about climate change. They talk about the changes that they are seeing in the quality of the sun, in the quality of their crops, and that is in some ways how they are articulating climate change. And we need to understand those nuances in our communities, and building social consensus through understanding public perceptions is important. But there's also another flip side to it: the miscommunication, the misinformation around climate change. What it is, it's not voodoo. It's not voodoo. It is a real phenomenon that is grappling, that is affecting all of us, and that we are all grappling with the world over. And this climate, the denialism, and as you know, in this country, we have a history of denialism in some ways. And I'm talking COVID and the misinformation there. And think about it: the soonest we as HSRC, we were able to provide concrete information about COVID-19, the perceptions started changing, misinformation started to erode slowly. This is what we also need to do, and we have started doing that with this survey, working in partnership with PCC. As you can hear, I'm very passionate about this work. Let me conclude with maybe one or two remarks. First, I would obviously want this work to continue, the partnership with PCC to continue. I'm hoping that in the next one day, in 10 years' time, we will be able to come to have done a number of a series of this survey, and in 10 years' time, we are able to say, think about where we were in 2024, think of where we are. And having said that, it is important that this work is starting now. As HSRC, we're starting our 5-year strategic plan, 2025 to 2030. And I promise you, climate change and as a strategic thematic is at the heart of our plan. And therefore, this work that we've started with PCC will continue. Thank you again for joining this important webinar as we celebrate a launch of one of our important research work at the HSRC in partnership with PCC. I'm looking forward to also hearing some of the colleagues that have been brought in who would reflect on our work. And with that, thank you very much for this opportunity. And I am indeed excited, and it is an honor for us to be here today. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Prof. Indeed, I could feel you already turning the heat on the debate, no pun intended. But we look forward to the findings. And with those, I think it's clear that the HSRC and the PCC have just signed in a writ of marriage with this project and will be on this path together for a long time. Colleagues, catch up on the time. Let me call upon the lead team that facilitated this work to tell us what were the questions, what did they find out, what was the scope of the research, and I think most importantly to start telling us, in addition to what the CEO has said, who oversees for this kind of work. On the panel of the key research team, I've got Dr. Ben Roberts, I've got Dr. Jare Struweg, and I've got Dr. Thobeka Zondi. And it's put me under pressure to also start looking forward to getting a doctorate. But with those words, Dr. Ben Roberts, can you lead the team as we engage so that we could quickly get into the feedback from the stakeholders and the open discussion? Dr. Roberts, you can.
Thank you, Dr. Manala.
Wow, thank you. And it's off record. I don't want to be charged for anything else in the PCs. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So this is today going to be a joint presentation by Dr. Thobeka Zondi and I. Thobeka is a former HSRC colleague who was instrumental to this project. She's currently working at the Political Sciences Department at UCT, but she's a strong collaborator with the HSRC team still. So she'll give us an introductory set of introductions, a bit more context to the background and purpose and framing of the study. I'll then take over and run through some of the results, and then Thobeka will return with some of the summary concluding findings. So I'm just going to share my screen there, and if you could just confirm, Chair, that it is displaying. I'm just going to.
It has come through, Prof. Doctor, you can just make it into presentation mode. Thank you.
Okay, let me do that. Thank you. Let's see how to keep it on. This show again.
Please note that the presentation will also be made available on the PC's website. And Taliseng has shared the link on the chat room. Please cut and copy that into your browser so that you can have access to it later. Proceed.
Thank you. Is it now in presentation mode on your side?
It's proper.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to hand over to Thobeka to take us through the first background slides.
All right. Good afternoon to our distinguished guests. Thank you so much for having us. My name is Thobeka Zondi, as they have mentioned, and today we will share our high-level findings of attitudes towards climate change and the just transition. I would like to give some context of the survey, then I will hand over to my colleague, Dr. Benjamin Roberts. So this survey is a significant initiative that is focused on filling knowledge gaps regarding public awareness, beliefs, and behavior relating to climate change and the just transition. As we know, climate change poses one of the most greatest threats to our lives, livelihoods, and natural systems. However, there is a lack of representative data on public awareness, beliefs, and behavior relating to climate change and the just transition. And the ability to make informed and inclusive decisions, this can shape the sustainability policy measures. And in response to this particular challenge, the PCC has aimed to survey key dimensions such as climate change, so awareness about climate change, perceptions of climate change as a potential threat to the lives and livelihoods, responsibility for addressing the problem. And when we move towards the just transition, the awareness of the transition in response to climate change, including familiarity with the term just transition, the perceived impact of transition on people's lives and livelihoods, support for policy measures in the just transition, and inclusive decision-making processes around the transition, and trust among the key different institutions. Next slide, please. So just a brief touch on our methodology. So the South African Social Attitude Survey is conducted annually by the Human Sciences Research Council since 2003. It's nationally representative, including individuals aged 16 and older living in private residences. 3,500 households are randomly selected, and we have a realization rate of 80%, so 3,103 respondents. The data is benchmarked, it's weighted to mid-year population estimates, and the mode for collecting the data is through face-to-face interviews. We also adhere to strict ethical protocols, quality control, and close field work monitoring and back-checking. And the PCC module is conceptually grounded, and it draws on previously fielded items. Let's touch on the Stern's value belief model that we used, which is commonly known as the VBN model, and it focuses on climate change beliefs, concerns, personal norms, and efficacy beliefs and policy preferences. So using this particular model, we firstly explore whether individual climate awareness and views on climate change reality and causes the shape concern about climate change. We then examine whether these variables influence how South Africans feel about personal responsibility to take action to address climate change. And then secondly, in our model, we examine how climate change awareness concerns and responsibility influence awareness and beliefs relating to the just transition, and by extension promotes support for specific just transition policy preferences. And the model also accounts for how demographic and socioeconomic characteristics, as well as experiences of climate shocks, and how this influence the views of the just transition. So I would like to just hand over to Dr. Benjamin Roberts, who will take us through the stats of the high-level findings.
Thank you very much, Rebecca, and thanks again to everyone for being here and to the Commission for helping to organise the webinar so we can release these findings. The first one is we know that over the last decade or more, we've seen an intensification in climatic-related shocks. And so one of the aspects that Rebecca just referred to was the extent to which this might be a key influencing factor on attitudes, beliefs, and behaviours. So this is a measure that we fielded which looked at to what extent extreme weather events had affected the respondents and their families over the 10 years prior to our survey. And what we found here is there was quite strong acknowledgement of effect. So it was most common amongst residents of KwaZulu-Natal and those with higher asset ownership levels. We also find that the variable proved to be, and this is kind of giving a foretaste of what's to come, one of the most significant predictors of awareness, also of concern about climate change. And it's less likely, the public is less likely to be skeptical about aspects of climate change, both the reality of the changing trend, as well as the causes of climate change, if they have been affected by climatic shocks. So the picture, the graphs on the slide, just give you a sense of that distribution spatially and nationally of this particular indicator. Importantly, we also find that those who are more likely to have been impacted display a greater pro-environmental norm, a greater sense of something needs to be done and I have to be part of the solution. Turning to awareness levels, and I think my CEO referred to some aspects of this, and it's something that
Sorry, Ben, to interrupt you. Is it possible to turn up your mic? You're a little bit soft. We can hear you, but yeah.
Yeah. Is this any clearer, Yuri? Hi, Yuri, is that any better?
Yeah, a little bit better. Thanks.
Okay, I'm hoping that's better for everyone.
Oh, much, much better. Thanks.
Apologies for that. I've just changed my headset. So in terms of awareness, this is something we've been monitoring since the late 2000s, and it indeed has been through a process of change. With support from the Department of Science and Innovation in 2007, we did our first surveying on this particular aspect of climate change, and we found at that stage only 18% knew a lot or a fair amount about climate change itself. A decade later, we began surveying again, and this time we found there had been a substantive jump. So that 18% had now become 34%, saying that they knew a lot or a fair amount about climate change. And we, in partnership with the Department of Fisheries, Forestries and the Environment, as well as the CSR, we've established a new environmental monitoring tool. And in 22, that showed that 34% had jumped again to 49%. And a year later, which is the PCC work, we find it's at a similarish level. So there has been a dramatic improvement, but there's still a way to go. And I think this is what Professor Motsetsa referred to in her opening remarks. In addition, we find South Africans have become more attuned to climate change, but the fact that a third still know very little, and 70% said that they actually really haven't heard have much heard of it or know very little, have no real recognition of the term, is indeed alarming. Some of the factors underlying this awareness I've referred to in the last slide, the extreme weather events and how that shapes one's awareness of climate change. Other factors, there is a class dynamic that underlies this. So we find that awareness is high amongst the better educated, those in higher occupational categories, as well as other forms of minorities. There's also spatial patterning to us, and that to some degree is correlated with the extreme weather events, but it's particularly high in KwaZulu-Natal, and that's probably linked especially to the dramatic flooding that was experienced a couple of years ago. It's also quite common amongst those in the Free State, especially relative to the national average. In terms of skepticism, and there's a big debate, is it, what constitutes skepticism? Is this the right term to label it? But we look at two particular elements of what, in terms of international literature, is branded skepticism. One is what they called trend skepticism, and that is the extent, whether one doubts whether the climate is changing or not. And we've got 2 rounds of recent survey on this, the PCC obviously in 2023, but we also did the same measure was fielded in 2020 in the HSRC's social attitude survey. And we can see that there's a small but notable share that express still some lingering question marks around whether or not climate is indeed changing. It has declined slightly from 16% in 2020 to 10% in 23, but we'd like to see that obviously at 0 level if possible. So there's a little way to go to try and deal with that lingering trend skepticism that we see in society. The more worrying phenomenon is actually what's referred to as attribution skepticism, and that's the extent to which the public attributes the causes of climate change to natural processes or to human activity. And we find that there's quite a strong share of South Africans that believe that these are natural processes. I'll give you a sense of how, by comparison, this looks. So what we can see, if you look particularly at the far left-hand side, and this is rank ordered based on the 2020 Cross-National International Social Survey Programme figures, that South Africans indeed have far higher attribution skepticism than average, so around the 30% mark. It's far higher than other, for instance, BRICS countries like India, Russia, China. So it's something that we are slightly exceptional on, and it's something that needs to be challenged. The reason it matters, and we'll see later, is that prevailing view has a particular bearing on different perceptions and indeed on actions. Turning to climate concern, and we've in 2017, 22, and now the 23 PCC engagement, we've looked at how worried are South Africans about climate change. And we actually see quite high levels of concern. If you look at the far right-hand side of the screen, we've summarized some of the different categories. So you can see the share that's very or extremely worried. So in 2017, it was half the public. It remained around the same level in 22. It declined slightly in 23, but it's in the mid 40s to 50 range. So quite large shares of South Africans do express quite high levels of concern. The share that are not at all or not very worried is around the 15% mark and has remained consistently so over the three survey assessments. The predictors of this climate concern, it tends to be higher amongst those that have high awareness. So if you're more aware of climate change, you're more likely to express concern about what's happening. It's also for those that have been affected by extreme weather events, they continue to express quite high levels of concern. And for those that have lower skepticism about climate change, they're more likely to also voice concern. Again, I thought we'd just give a little bit of a comparative picture and just show that even relative to the example on the screen is European nations, South Africans voice very high levels of concern. It's in the European context, it ranks along the southern European nations of Portugal and Spain. So we are quite, even though there might be growing awareness, but still a gap, we find that the concern is definitely there and more acutely so than other nations around the world. We then look at pro-environmental personal norms, and this is a sense of personal responsibility to try and protect the environment. This tends to reflect feelings of obligation, responsibility to either perform or refrain from particular actions that might contribute to the solution of a perceived collective problem. And we focus on norms relating to climate change mitigation in order to slow or prevent climate change. And not adaptation, as that will not address the problem itself. So if we look at the top half of the scale, which tends to be more pro-environmental in character, 49% were in this range. Around the midpoint, we've got another 20% of the public. And in the bottom half, about just under a third of the public fall below the mean of this scale. So again, we have kind of averaging levels of pro-environmental personal norm. Some of the comparative work we've done has shown that we sort of rank towards the middle of the country rankings. The predictors of this particular measure is again, higher climate concern we see is associated with stronger pro-environmental norms, and this fits that theoretical model that Tobeka put up earlier, as well as being more affected by the extreme weather events. So you can see that the impact of weather events, these extreme climatic shocks, is coming through time and again in our measures as a key predictor. Now we turn to the aspects of the survey that looked at the term, aspects of just transition. Firstly, we thought, let's try and see, we throw around this term a lot nowadays in daily conversation, or at least in certain segments of society. And we thought, is there actual proper understanding of what it means? We can see from this pie chart on the screen that only 22% had heard of, admittedly, the English term before. So there's very little term recognition. 65% said they'd not heard of it at all, and a further 13% said they don't really know what it means. Of those that had heard of it, there's very, that knowledge is quite thin. So, there's a long way to go in terms of promoting understanding of it. And I think it's also the social linguistics of when we talk about climate change. We must make sure we move to non-technical terms. So don't just throw around just transition. Try and get to the underlying concepts of what it's all about. And we were forced to do that because of surveying to a diverse public. In terms of awareness, so we started using this non-technical terminology, and you can read the
exact phrasing on the top of the screen. What we found when we asked this way is that 23% said they knew nothing about these kind of actions that are involved in the just transition. 41% said they knew a little bit about it, 22% quite a bit, and only 9% said that they knew a lot. So again, even when one provides a very non-technical, simplified explanation, we find that the knowledge is just not yet there. There's a long way to go. The predictors of this is there's a strong, somewhat intuitive association between greater climate change awareness and lower climate skepticism. We see that greater climate concern predicts greater awareness of the just transition. Greater sense of pro-environmental responsibilities also leads to greater awareness of the just transition. Do South Africans support the just energy transition, at least in principle? And this is what we try to do with this measure. What we found is that just over 60% said that they approve or strongly approve of the just energy transition. 20% were quite more neutral in their viewpoint, with only 13% saying they disapproved or strongly disapproved of this kind of action being taken. So at least in terms of general principle, the kind of actions involved in the just energy transition are favored by the South African public. We also asked about, are you concerned about personal negative impacts of the just transition? And when we look at this, what we found is there is quite a strong degree, level of worry. So we can see that 10% only 10% were not worried at all. Further 13% expressed very low worry. Moderate worry was common to just under a third at 29%. And then being very or extremely worried was expressed by 28%. We also found that 15% just said, no, that this won't impact me at all. So, I don't need to harbor any worry. But so we find a strong subset of the public expressing quite high levels of worry. This is more common to those that are worried about climate change as a whole, and those that have greater awareness of the just transition. So just because one is aware of the just transition doesn't lead one to a positive view of it. There is quite a lot of concern amongst those that know more about what the just transition is all about. So what do South Africans think positively? What are the sense of the positive impacts that the just transition might bring about? So that number one was response from the public in this regard was it will help stabilize the reliability of our electricity supply. So load shedding will reduce or end. Another 40% expressed the view that it might enhance economic growth. A similar share said that electricity prices will hopefully decrease. And 30% said hopefully it will lead to more jobs than before. So strong kind of socioeconomic patterning to those responses. Others voice, and much smaller shares, said that it might lead to health improvements. It might provide women and youth with more opportunities. It might lead to an improvement in air quality. And actually, one of the lowest ranked ones was the environmental gains. The health of the environment will improve, mentioned by 13%. The negative aspects that people refer to are almost the inverse of what we've just seen. They worry that they might end up paying more for electricity. There might be loss of jobs. There might be worse load shedding. The local environment might get adversely impacted, and that there could be health impacts or impacts on one's family as well. Only 27% said they're not worried at all. They don't perceive there to be any negative consequences. So, but we can see how the two interrelate. It means there's a lot of expectations on the just transition, and particularly of, as I indicated earlier, of a socioeconomic gain kind of perspective coming through. But the two work hand in hand. The positives and the negatives are just mirror images of one another, in effect. This brings us through to the policy measures, and we just tested a few, and I think on the screen we've got 6 different options, and some of them relate to training and skills development for workers who lose jobs through the just transition. Some of it is about short-term financial assistance to vulnerable groups, including women and youth, supporting local businesses to create job opportunities in those areas that might be adversely affected by the just transition, as well as educational opportunity to help people find jobs in new sectors. And lastly, the basic income grant, whether that should be a way to help offset negative consequences. If we look at the top row, and that's the share that agreed with all these different particular options, we see that all of them received fairly high support, between 70 and 78% across all those 6 different policy options. Very small shares, and you can see the third row, it's between about 5 and 10% were opposed to these particular types of policies being favored. We created an index of this measure set, and we found that the predictors of greater support for the just energy transition related social policy set really was about lowest climate skepticism, and lower worry about the personal impacts that the just transition may have on oneself and one's family, as well as a greater sense of personal responsibility for climate action to take place, and also support for the just energy transition actions in principle. So those were some of the strongest drivers of a more favorable view for these particular policy preferences. In terms of the last few slides on the results are about who should hold primary responsibility for addressing the climate crisis. And what we found here is 52% mentioned the South African government. So there's a strong emphasis on the state playing a strong role in relation to climate change and climate-related prevention and mitigation policies. A further 16% referred to a role for international governments playing having a clear hand in addressing the crisis as well. Interestingly, 40% mentioned some form of market responsibility too, and that includes large companies including Eskom itself as being part of the solution. So those are the dominant responses that came through. Individuals and their households themselves, as mentioned, by 19%. So clearly the emphasis is more on state, public action driving responses to climate crisis, but there is a subset that focuses on individuals themselves taking primary responsibility. More narrowly, in terms of just transition decision making, we asked who should be involved, and also who do you most trust to manage the just transition. You can see from both bar charts, and they're ranked from highest to lowest, you can see that national government comes through quite strongly in both. In terms of the left-hand graph, it's 44% mention national government, 28% want business or the private sector and industry involved, 28% want local governments involved. Multi-stakeholder collaboration such as that the Presidential Climate Commission itself represents was favored by 22%. Others want NGOs and non-profit organizations to be quite clearly involved, so that's 21% mentioned that. And you can see a role is also there for community leaders, trade unions. So clearly there's a demand for multi-stakeholder involvement around dealing with the just transition. It's not one or the other. It's quite a complex combination of institutions and stakeholders that the public would favor being part of a collective solution. On the trust, again, the government was top mentioned. A presidential committee, multi-stakeholder of the type that the PCC represents, was the second ranked, businesses and private sector third, and local government, MPOs, trade unions and community leaders close to around the 7 to 10% range. So again, their trust is quite spread. It's not all dominating in like government alone. It's very diverse views coming from the public on decision-making processes. Lastly, before I hand back to Tobeka, I'd just like to say spatially, and this isn't in the high-level findings report we're releasing today, but it's in a more in-depth reports that we're releasing. We're just putting the finishing touches to. But we wanted to test does physical proximity to coal mines or coal-fired power stations matter for any of these different perceptions and perspectives that we've talked about. And what we found is that while it didn't have a significant effect on climate concern or personal pro-environmental responsibility or concerns about the just energy transition impacts on personally, there was a moderate association with higher climate change awareness. There was a similar association with lower skepticism and stronger support for the particular just transition energy actions. So in both in principle, as well as in terms of the specific set of policies that we talked about. So it does have an effect, perhaps not as large as one might have wanted it to play, but it's clearly there. That could be because some of these aspects are quite generalized amongst the public, and they're slightly more intensive. There's slightly more intense sentiment coming through the closer one gets, particularly to that concentration of the red dots that one sees around Mpumalanga and Gauteng. With that, I'm going to hand back to Becca just to pull together a few basic conclusions.
Well, thanks. Proceed, Tobeka.
Thank you very much, Ben. So in conclusion, our in-depth survey analysis provided confirmatory evidence that our conceptual model largely holds, and that climate change awareness kept on increasing over time. And it's also driven by experiences of extreme weather events and socio-demographics. And in terms of climate concern is very broad-based in the country. So informed awareness, so there's higher awareness associated with greater concern. However, lower climate skepticism is associated with higher concern, and higher concern among those affected by extreme weather events. South Africans display moderate personal pro-environmental ethic. Sorry, Ben, you just clicked the PowerPoint. And higher climate concern is associated with stronger pro-environmental norms. So being affected by extreme weather events strengthens pro-environmental norms. And as social media usage increases, pro-environmental norms also increased. Next slide. And when touching on the just energy transition measures, there is limited awareness, but it's supported in principle. So it's higher among those with higher climate change knowledge and climate concern and pro-environmental norms. It's also higher among those with higher news media usage. But however, we've seen that it is lower among those with higher climate skepticism. There's also high expectations of personal and national benefits. So environmental gains subsidiary for now, and many worry about the adverse personal impacts, so including the cost and reliability of energy supply, job and income loss, and higher concern about personal negative impacts among those with greater climate concern and just transition awareness. However, lower concerns among those with greater media usage in rural areas. Thank you. That's it from my end, Ben.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Back
Ben.
to you, Blessing. Yeah. Oh.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Ben.
Thank you very much, team, and thank you for that slide. It really shows that you put in the best of the best in managing the project there. But we'll now go into the panel with the multi-stakeholders, and I'll hand over to Yuri to facilitate that. But as I said, continue to drop questions, further requests on the chat, so that we manage both the time in the online engagement and after the session. Yuri, back to you.
Thanks, Blessing. We are running out of time, so I will jump in quite quickly. But just to note, when you put your question in the chat after the panel discussion, perhaps just let us know if you want it to the HSRC or someone else in particular. So we've got an esteemed panel today, colleagues, and I would like to introduce our first speaker. and that is Commissioner Mapaseka Lukhele. Let's pronounce that correctly. And let me just tell you a bit about our commissioner. Stop my video. Sorry, my video is off. Commissioner Mapaseka is the General Manager, Corporate Sustainability at, sorry, my notes have disappeared. Okay, I'll come back to that. I know she's been responsible for various portfolios, including environment, quality, business continuity, stakeholder engagement, and climate change. She's also dealt with energy management and sustainability. Commissioner Mapaseka has many years of experience directing and coordinating the implementation of environmental, social and governance strategies. She also dealt with policies, frameworks, standards, and management systems at a senior level and at an executive level. Importantly, she's an active member of the Monitoring and Evaluation Working Group at the PCC. So I now invite Commissioner Mapaseka to give us some input on how she sees the findings of this important report. Thank you.
Thank you, Yuri, and good afternoon, colleagues. I think your notes disappeared, so General Manager at Transnet. So from the resources constituency. Thank you, Yuri, and I mean, thank you to the colleagues who presented the report. I think it's quite an important report for the PCC, and especially for the PCC Monitoring and Evaluation Working Group. I think it's quite important and crucial for understanding for understanding South Africans' priorities in terms of climate change and as well as just transition. I think, you know, what I could pick up from the report is that while the results of climate change awareness are encouraging, I think there's still a lot more work to be done in terms of, you know, raising awareness about the concept of a just transition. I think the findings really reflect, also they reflect South Africans' priorities, but they also reflect that South Africans prioritize socio-economic issues such as unemployment over climate change responses. And I think this really reflects the lack of understanding of the connection between basic human rights as well as climate change. And I think this is something that as a commission, we would really want to, you know, unpack a bit more. But also it also reflects that there is lack of understanding in terms of how just transition can create a more resilient as well as equitable society. So I think there needs to be more work in terms of just trying to show or illustrating that linkages and illustrating how the impacts of climate change can affect human rights as well as livelihoods, but also illustration on how a just transition can then improve on livelihoods of the people. I think it is also essential to clarify what the term just transition means, because it can seem like a very technical term, and you know, most people don't understand it. So although the awareness of just transition is low, I think the awareness on a transition away from coal is greater, and maybe we can leverage on that awareness to, you know, to emphasize the connection between a transition away from coal as well as just transition. There's quite a significant portion of concerns around the cost of electricity, as well as potential job losses due to just transition. And I think this is one area where the PCC would be particularly interested, just in terms of making sure that there is communication with our communities, labor groups, and highlighting how the current and future social and economic policies can then mitigate some of these threats. Also from the report itself, we're seeing a greater support for the national government leadership in terms of a transition. But I think, again, the report is a very critical resource for understanding a just transition. However, I think additional data sources such as interviews of people on the ground who really experience some of these realities might be useful in terms of adding additional information and ensuring that people really understand the issue around climate change as well as just transition. I think we can leverage on other reports to make sure that people really understand, and maybe as time goes on, we might see a change in the perception and the attitude. And I think from PCC monitoring and evaluation, I think it would be important to have regular intervals of this kind of survey, just so that we can monitor the impact that especially the PPC is having, but also the impact that the government is having, but overall, other additional interventions from various sectors. I think that will be useful so that we can keep on monitoring and checking whether we are making progress or not. But I think overall, the report is really essential in understanding what the South African think about just transition, but also about climate change. It also helps us to identify where information gaps are and where really the concerns lie, and so that at least our interventions can then be intentional in terms of addressing those gaps. And I think the report really concludes in saying that public attitudes have the ability to influence political will as well as political decisions. And we hope that this is one of important piece of information that will help us to strive that goal in terms of changing the political will, influencing decisions that are made by our leaders. But on that note, Yuri, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. I think, yes, it's indeed an excellent baseline report. And I think it'll be particularly helpful for the PCC in focusing our efforts moving forward. And you are indeed correct. We need to replicate the study at regular intervals to understand if the work we are doing or the state is doing is having the intended impact. So thanks so much for your input. I'm now going to hand over to Dr. Mofokeng. Dr. Mofokeng is the member of the National Union of Mine Workers, which is a COSATU affiliate. He works in the energy sector at Eskom as a shop steward. And we thought that the input of labor is vital at this event, noting the impact that the just transition would have in labor and on the families of workers and the value chains as well. So let me hand over to Dr. Mofokeng. Thanks.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks, Yuri. I hope I'm audible.
You are audible. Would it be possible to put on your video? But if not, it's okay.
Okay, let me try that.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, man. Our input to the report, even though we didn't have much time to engage on it, but we went through the report and it's very much interesting, and we are somehow appreciating the work done by PCC, and so we are hoping that as a union, that will be our foundation to deal with some real facts around what is written on the report. More especially the 9% of South African that have heard the term just transition. Because when you take a look at the term itself, is portrayed as a replacement of what is existing, which is a transition from coal to renewables. And now the perception itself is not giving the holistic approach to the term itself, because now everyone, when you ask about what is just transition, people will think, no, we're gonna lose jobs. This is not gonna help us. But now we appreciate that remarks of research of 9% more. The second thing, it will be that the 62% of South African approves of the transition away from coal. But there are still concerns about potential impact around it. That also will assist us, because now those concerns needs to be addressed, because we look at climate change as the giving birth to the just energy transition. But now we can't separate it from the term itself. Now those concerns needs to be addressed, and as Labour, that will give us a chance to engage and see how will it benefit to our members, because the challenge we are facing daily, as much as we are anti-climate change as a union, but is the concerns on the ground of people losing jobs, and how will they survive through the future with what is perceived as, when you are not working on a mine or shutting down the power stations, how will you survive? Because renewables doesn't give you the same numbers that you're gonna lose from the coal as it is currently, even the power stations. Because I believe that as much as the research is concentrated in all provinces, which will assist us, but the opportunity of bringing renewables to every province, because it's not like you can bring hydro in the province of Gauteng. There's those cleaner energy where they belong, probably where there's water, but we believe that there are those renewables that can be brought to all the other regions and provinces that can assist, more especially those places where the current ESCOM can't reach, so that can be a start for those people to be assisted with electricity. I won't say much, but then eventually we appreciate the report, and will engage as the union and other shop stewards, and try to see, when we're going forward, how can we readdress what was left behind and what we see that will work for us going forward. We thank you, Yuri.
Thanks so much, Doctor. And yes, thank you for joining us almost at the last minute upon our request. It is important to know the characteristics of the 9% to understand a just transition, but it's also important to know, if they understand fully what a just transition is, what the implication is, for the broader economy, climate resilient green economy. And yes, you made some interesting points about the number of jobs in the coal sector versus the number of jobs in the renewable energy sector. But I think we need more engagement around that, because not all the jobs may be absorbed by the renewable energy sector. It may be other sectors. So I think we need to keep engaging with government, with stakeholders, with communities on that. I'm now going to hand over to Mabu Molele. Mabu Molele is a shop steward from Satau, which is also affiliate of COSATU. She works at PROS as a train driver, and she's a Global Labor University social theory alumni, and she has extensive training and experience in labor law. She's currently studying, and this is quite impressive, she's currently studying alternate dispute resolutions through the University of Free State and a Bachelor of Arts in Criminology through UNISA. Mabo is a member of the COSATU Climate Change Committee, and she says she's very passionate about serving and representing workers. So are we, Mabo. If we could please have your input. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yuri. Yeah, it's very interesting actually. Ask me someday, not today, why criminology? I don't know why, but yeah, I find myself there. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you once more, Yuri, for the invite. It's very interesting, and good afternoon to everyone that is a part and parcel of this meeting. When I got the invite and the report, I was very excited because this is something that we have always raised through the COSATU Climate Change Committee, to say that the issues of just energy transition seems to be more on the high level, or in like closed doors in boardrooms and all that. There isn't much that has been done or said, or there isn't much understanding when you take this down back to the community. I like sharing this, and if there are people from KZN in this meeting, please forgive me in advance, but I like sharing this to say that we normally, I like engaging a lot, so I would take it back to the people in the community where I'm staying, and also being a person that goes to church as well. I would like to talk to people that we go. So we were having a conversation when we had the first floods in KZN. I think it was around during COVID, when COVID started, 2020, somewhere there. And it was interesting to hear a person saying, no, what is happening currently in KZN is happening because God is angry, is punishing people from KZN. So people would not then put it back to say we have something that we call a climate crisis. And it was worrying and also interesting at the same time. It then proved to us to say, we still have more people that have lacking this knowledge, and it then means that there is more work that needs to be done. Hence, whenever we are in the PCC meetings, we always say, we hear what PCC you are saying, we hear that we have different social people from the social society and all that, civil society, sorry. However, we feel that this work needs to be taken down to the ground, whereby a person from a community in the deep rural areas can have a knowledge of what we are talking about when we say climate change, when we say just energy transition. And some, when you talk to them, they'll even tell you that, Mabu, stop this English that you are speaking. The moment you just say just energy transition, they say you are speaking deep English, you are taming them, because they don't have the understanding. So this report, this survey, when you shared that, even though, like Comrade Doctor has indicated, even though we did not have much time to go through it, but it was very interesting to see that the work that PCC is doing is now being taken down to the people that definitely are affected by the whole thing. So I made a bit of notes, but like I'm not gonna go through. What I picked up then is that what I found interesting actually is in the slide about the approval of the just energy transition. And for me, I normally say that the people in provinces like Mpumalanga, people in provinces like Limpopo, originally I'm from Limpopo, but where I'm coming from, there are no mines. But you have the other part of Limpopo where you have mines and all that. Those are the people that actually are supposed to be sharing or telling us how exactly does it feel like, how affected are they. I am from the transport sector. SATAU organizes in different, they've got different sectors like your security cleaning, but I'm from the rail sector. Currently, there isn't much work, or work. I believe that from the PCC point of view, you guys are busy, you are doing some work around transport sector as well. But on our side, as a trade union, we are not there yet. Hence, you find some of us being actively involved in the COSATU Climate Change Committee, so that we want to be the ones that we don't want to find ourselves wondering by the time that we also as well have to now transit, because I remember there's a national rail policy that was launched that is talking about moving, everything transiting from the road to the rail, because we are also affected as well in terms of the road freight comrades that we are organizing in. So for me, then it says that currently where we are sitting, I would be very happy and very interested to hear the comrades that, because we do have your Transnet, we do have your PRASA, I mean, not PRASA, you do have your Transnet rail sector. We organize both in rail, in Transnet and PRASA. So it will be interesting to hear what are the comrades from Mpumalanga saying, and what are their views. Currently, we know about our comrades in other sectors, trade unions like UNUM and all that. What are they saying about the ones that are based in Mpumalanga, the ones that are in Limpopo and all that? So the survey, I found it very interesting to say somewhere it talks about Gauteng residents being the ones approving or saying that, or supporting saying that they're supporting the transition as compared to your Mpumalanga, as compared to your Limpopo. So it then shows that the people that are affected by this, you have a portion that will then say, yes, we are supporting the transition because they understand they have been affected by the floods and all that. So a person that is in Gauteng will be easy for them to say, yeah, let's transit, because when you talk about job losses, they would not be affected by that. And the notion of saying that the just transition is going to provide or give more jobs for us as labor is still to be proven. We have not yet been shown to say, because if now you say, you are going to provide jobs, and yet you don't know about, we are not taken through about the kind of the skills that we need for us to be able to transit from where we are, then it becomes a problem for one to believe that today, Mabu, as a train driver, now if we are transiting, you can still have the job, because currently the skills that I have, chances are it might not talk to what you have in line when it comes to the people that are in the transport sector. So I think these are the conversations that we are worth having for both of us. And I don't believe the part where it says who has to lead this. It talks about the private. I made note somewhere. It says the private sector and the business people. Naturally as labor, when you come to the private sector and you come to the business and us in the same room, we would not get along, because ours will be to say we are for the job security, and the private sector and the business people, it will always be about profit for them. We are representing the poor of the poorest. So the poor of the poorest for us will be like, if now you are coming, there is no link or there's no conversations that are happening between us and the private sector and the business people, would always be, oh, I see here, 1 minute more, thank you, will always be to say that we are not guaranteed as to whether our jobs are secured or what. So these conversations, and if ever, in fact, the just energy transition, from what we know, is that it's a labor movement concept. Therefore, it cannot be correct to say that other people have to lead this. The ones that are directly affected in this regard, which are workers, are the ones that has to be taken through in these conversations, have to be in the lead of everything in order for them to understand. And because I had to comrade a doctor here saying that the issue of job creations, because right now where we are sitting, when we say the just, currently we are not yet in the just transition, because for as long as other people have this misunderstanding or they are not aware yet of what is happening, it means it's not just. So just for us, as the labor says, everyone will be taken through, will have an understanding of what we're talking about when we say we have to transit, we have to move away from the kind of the emissions that we are committing as transport into the green energy and all that. Then in that way, we are transiting smoothly, so no one is left behind. But it's a beautiful presentation, survey, and thank you so much once more for sharing this. We'll go through this again, and if there is a need for us to then submit more comments, we'll definitely do so. Thank you so much, Yuri, and your team. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Marvel. That was extremely powerful. And yes, your comments will always be welcome. And we do understand, the concerns about labor, and they're extremely valid concerns. I also think that this particular research will be supplemented with other pieces of research. So for example, at the moment, the PCC is interviewing individuals along the coal belt and other areas, for stories on how they experience the just transition. So that can, supplement some of the information that we've collected here. I'm going to hand over to our last speaker on this panel. Unfortunately, we are running out of time. I would have liked to have, engaged in the discussion a bit more, but we're running a bit behind. So I want to introduce Fani Mia. Fani is an emerging social cultural anthropologist interested in delving into the intricacies of human societies through his anthropological lens. Fani endeavors to unravel the complexities of societal dynamics, bridging local contexts with global challenges. His focus is on energy issues, especially within the context of climate change, which mirrors his dedication to addressing pressing societal concerns. Fani has an unwavering commitment to advancing anthropological perspectives in understanding contemporary challenges, and it echoes his relentless pursuit in excellence in driving positive change. Fani, I hand over to you. Thanks.
Greetings, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to speak here. First and foremost, the report, or rather, was very interesting. It was very nice and short and convenient for me to read and understand as a young person. At first glance, or rather when I first saw it, and when I read through it, it looks largely to be a qualitative report, which is very convenient but problematic at the same time. Now, the reason why I'm saying it's a bit problematic is that while quantitative research methods tend to kind of like give an overview, which is literally what you're trying to do here, it does, however, lack the in-depth, the materials, the quality, the experience of what the transition is meant to be, right? So especially when you start to factor in who's approving, who's not approving. And I'm also going to echo some of the panelists' sentiments when they say that it's very easy for a person in Johannesburg rather than Gauteng to say that, yeah, we approve of the just energy transition and the way that it is being implemented, because they won't be affected. They're not the first persons to be immediately affected. So moving forward, I would love for there to be a more concentration, rather, a focus on the communities that are being immediately affected. For example, we know that for a fact that Komati, the decommissioning of Komati power station is just one of more to come, right? So we want to get, or rather it would be more advisable to get data collections from the people who are being directly affected within Mpumalanga. So again, I would love a more focus on Mpumalanga and what the people in Mpumalanga are saying, because not only are most mines there, but also the power stations are there. Again, I cannot speak entirely as a representative of young people, but there was a paper that was recently launched by ALCOI South Africa. So it was a partnership between the South African Climate Action Network and the African Climate Reality Project. So now that paper, it was released, I think, just a few hours ago. If you look into it, you will get a more in-depth a more in-depth report of what young people really think about the transition and what their positions. But also, just to add to my bio, I'm also part of the YCC steering committee, which is part of the Climate Ambition to Accountability project. And just a few weeks back ago, we had a boot camp in the Northwest where we convened with over 20 young cohorts, and we were talking about the just energy transition. So what was a major takeaway from me, or an emerging theme that was coming throughout the participants, was that they needed quote unquote Afrocentric solutions, because they still do feel like the just energy transition as it is unfolding in South Africa currently is very much influenced and informed by European, or rather Western ways or epistemologies. Let me just say epistemologies. They're very still much informed about Western epistemology. So young people want a more localized approach to the transition, taking into account what Dr. Mufokeng had said, that some some of these solutions may not work really, they may not really work, very well in certain areas. For example, you cannot bring in hydropower stations in Gauteng because there's not a lot of water. Perhaps you can bring in solar on top of these high-rise buildings and wind solar, but yeah, otherwise, yeah, the report was very, very, very nice. It's very nice. It's convenient, it's convenient, but I don't think at this point we need convenience. I think we need time to truly understand what is happening on the ground level. So again, I really encourage the PCC and the HSRC continuing. We need more qualitative data. Qualitative data will encourage us to go there and live the lived experience of the people who are being immediately affected, whether it be the labor force and other people along the value chain. Because when a person loses a job, it's not just that one person who loses their livelihood, but it's also a ripple effect of other people who lose a livelihood. The findings were a bit mind-boggling to me, especially when we said that there's 65 people who didn't know what the just energy transition was, but at the same time, there were 62% of the participants who said, "No, we agree with it." So I don't know. It's very mind-boggling. You can't say that you don't know something yet and then approve of it. But then again, I think this is where qualitative data might help in fine-tuning some of these things. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Fania. I thank you for the opportunity to present here, and I look forward to a more engaging discourse moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Fanny. I think if you were to engage a bit more with the work of the PCC, we're actually doing extensive work in Komati and the Coal Belt in Mpumalanga and also KwaZulu-Natal. But your point about having more localized, solutions to this problem is well taken, and the need for additional qualitative information, to supplement this information that's been provided here. Thank you to all panelists. We really appreciate your input. It would have been great to have, engaged a bit more on your responses. But I think we need to jump into the question and answer session. And I think so far, the majority of the questions are for Ben and Thobeka. So Ben, I'm wondering if you can assist us with answering some of the questions, and Thobeka as well.
Yes, thanks. And thanks to the panelists for those great comments. I think I fully agree with them, including the ones about the need for community engagement around these issues of the type that Yuri's referred to as happening through the PCC. The HSRC is also doing community research around the communities that are likely to be affected by the just energy transition. So I think there's a need for both. There's a need for quantitative and qualitative insight, and understanding how the two relate to another. So I do want to express my gratitude to the panelists for those kind of comments. In terms of the online Q&A, and Yuri, you'll have to help me a little bit. I've been trying to answer some of them. I think some of it's linked to particular stakeholder groups being directly included in the surveying. I think, and references made to certain indigenous groupings in society being adequately represented in the research. And I think again it goes back to what the panelists have said. I think we need sort of mixed methods approaches. I think the quantitative would include some, but probably not enough for a representation of particular constituencies and stakeholders. And that's where other forms of voice and capture, making sure voice
has been represented,
need to be factored in. Yuri, am I back again? I'm not sure. Can I continue? I'll continue. Assuming
proceed, Ben. I think Yuri's frozen.
Yuri's frozen. Okay. Thanks. So I think they're crucially important, making sure that the voice and representation comes through. Some of that can only be captured through the kind of qualitative approaches to complement the quants that we've heard from the various panelists. Other questions which have come through relate to the spatial variation. So I can see there's a question from Sotame about the spatial characteristics, particularly around this just transition awareness. And I think I just want to say one thing, because it did come up in the panel discussion. We had two approaches to dealing with the awareness of the just transition. One was using, actually, is there recognition of the English term just transition, and that's where that 9%, some of that, the very low awareness comes from. So there's very little awareness coming through of that English terminology that is, as we heard, is thrown around commonly in boardrooms, but not so much reflecting out in the communities, which needs to happen more. The other approach that we did was ask awareness, assumed people don't know that just transition term itself, but just gave a non-technical explanation and asked about their awareness of those kind of issues. And that's where we got obviously a higher level of awareness coming through, even though it's still circumscribed. So it wasn't a contradiction, as was indicated by Fani. It's about the different ways we ask the questions. The same, so even though so I think that's about the degree to which we explained before asking support and so on, and awareness. The other aspects on this, coming back to the spatiality, we do, as I said, Tobek and I indicated in the introductory remarks, is we're preparing a more in-depth report that's currently being finalized. That includes stronger spatial and demographics. So if you're interested in youth issues, you'll see across all the measures where there are differences amongst age group. You'll see if there's differences by rural, urban status, and you'll also see if there's differences on the basis of by province and a range of other factors. So they are important, and some of those gradients are particularly acute. So I can't summarize them all because it varies on a measure-to-measure basis, but that report will end up featuring on the PCC website probably fairly soon. So I'm sure there'll be notifications through the PCC of that release. Other questions on the Q&A? I think I'm just trying to see what's come through, and this is where I may need a bit of assistance. I think in terms of Try More, you've asked a sort of cluster of questions about, firstly, again, representation of Black marginalized communities in it. And some of those are included as part of the general representative national sample. So some of that's why we're able to, for example, test proximity to coal mines and coal-fired power stations. Some of the respondents are very literally on the doorsteps of some of of mines and power stations. But it doesn't, again, I just want to make it very clear, it doesn't replace the need for more localized surveying and localized qualitative work to accompany the quantitative research we've done, which is intended to be provincially and nationally representative. So I think some of that is crucial and is going to feature more strongly in the in-depth report. The report we're releasing today is kind of more the headline findings. I think once you see that in-depth report, you'll see that quite a lot of those issues raised and the kind of teasing out of more fine-grained patterns come through quite clearly.
Yeah, I think quite a few of the questions are asking how specific communities were integrated and how their views were collected. And as you said, this is a quantitative sample survey. It was done purposefully with all, race groups, but representative of the proportions according to the profile of our country. And then the engagement was through questionnaires, and, it wasn't a one-on-one interview engagement. But there is a question here on spatial, sort of spatial analysis. So firstly, it says they want to piggyback on Mabu's point on awareness of rural communities. I would like to know what's being done to ensure that rural and marginalized communities are capacitated and informed. And this is a broader effort by the PCC and other stakeholders. So it didn't form part of this particular study, but it is part of a broader issue that the PCC would be dealing with. Ben, I think the question would have been, what are the spatial characteristics of the people who don't know about the term just transition? Are these people mainly in rural areas? And what would the PCC start to do differently to increase awareness of these issues of the just transition in rural areas? Will language be considered in the communication strategy? So perhaps you could start, yeah.
I'll start, and perhaps even Blessing might want to answer about the communication dynamic, because it's something that's been quite frequently talked about, is, you know, how do these findings get communicated? We're talking in English today, but obviously it should be disseminated in other official languages too. Just to say on the spatial dimension, so that issue about the awareness, there is actually a rural-urban divide. So as rural areas and those residing in informal urban settlements, for instance, do have lower awareness than those in formal urban areas. There's greater interprovincial variation. So we find in, for instance, Gauteng in the Western Cape, there's high awareness, and that's to some degree is reflected by patterns of education and other factors, but quite low in Limpopo, in Northwest, in Northern Cape, etc. So they're quite strong, stark gradients of variation, and you know, I think we show that dynamic not just on awareness of the just transition, but on every single measure. We've provided that breakdown by type of geographic location as well as province, and a range of other measures, including the gender of respondent, the age group. So it's all will be in that more detailed report, and so that people can actually pick up on those particular dynamics that they're most interested in. It does speak to communication initiatives and moving beyond this more, you know, this technical vernacular that we tend to throw around. We should find non-technical ways of talking about these issues, and importantly, the translation of research findings into multiple languages. The survey is administered in multiple languages, so important to make sure that by equal measure, the results are translated back into a range of languages. Yeah.
Blessing, do you want to come in there?
Thanks, Yuri, and thanks, Ben. I mean, I think that there are two questions that are coming out, two cluster of questions. The one is, how are you going to communicate these findings and make sure that as many people understand what it says so that they can do something about it, whether they can increase outreach to communities, whether they can simplify their language, or whether they can balance the opportunities in Gauteng with the risks in Mpumalanga, whether they can make Mpumalanga and Gauteng speak the same language. That is one question. Then you've got a set of questions that says, what will the PCC do about this? Now, I always say this survey is not about what has happened over the last 3 years. So it should never be a question of what would the PCC do. It broadly should be about what are mining companies going to do to make sure that workers in coal mines understand better? What will government as the DFFE do to make sure that people understand climate change, not only when there is floods, also when you ask them to do smart agriculture? And those questions are not questions to the PCC. They are questions to the ecosystem of communicators, activists, unions, labor, business, to say, this is the state of perceptions and awareness. What the PCC has done is we're mobilizing what we call a national communication partnership to basically, and it is not a propaganda response to this survey, because we don't want to launch a propaganda response to this survey. We want to be able to say, this is what it means. If there is a state of awareness, our ambitions are at risk. Our people there will never be consensus. So for me, I would rather say, let us say we've received the survey, and that's what I thought I would do when I close. We've received the survey. It calls for much more robust communication strategy. It calls for more outreach with workers, but it also means that there are more fears about risks than opportunities. Why are we not amplifying the opportunities and putting people at comfort with the risks. So it's calling for action beyond communications. Can I stop there? And maybe when we conclude it, maybe the commissioners would even give better about how do we mobilize the platform of the PCC to take over the survey. And I think some of the ideas that were coming from, for example, labor, the two labor comrades about workers in the transport sector was great. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Blessing. I think this is a much broader conversation that we need to have as a PCC, but also with communities and labor and other stakeholders. There is a question on the underrepresentation or the lack of representation of Indigenous people. So there's 2 points there. Firstly, the survey was not aiming to capture the perspectives of one specific group. When we say it was a nationally representative survey, it was done with the entire population, considering, the proportions of different race groups or different communities we have profiled in the country. So that's how this particular survey was done. No particular group was targeted or omitted. But it's also important to note that Indigenous people are part of, special groups recognized by the Climate Change Act, and they will have to form part of the PCC once the act is in force. So they will have to be inclusion of Indigenous people going forward. It looks like there's a terminology problem of using just transition. I think there is a terminology problem. I think what even Fani didn't, was confused about is that people don't understand the term just transition, but when you break it down to ask, do you understand the move away from coal? They did understand that. It was just the terminology of just transition that was problematic. And is there local parlance of the terminology that may be more relatable to a broad range of people? So that's something, we may need to consider instead of using the words just transition, or to, just ensure that we are doing better in raising awareness on what a just transition is. It's not just job loss. It's not just moving away from coal. That's part of it. There's an energy transition, but there's also a much broader transition with, as Blessing said, opportunities and risks. And we need to highlight both of those. Do we have any more questions in the interim? Oh, sorry, I meant to say that on the language issue, the PCC has noted this, and this is why the PCC is translating the report. It's in fact translating a lot of the content that's on our website to other languages, particularly Sepedi and isiZulu, and this project will be completed by November. So we do aim to, have accessible information, and that's one of the ways we will be doing it. Are there any other questions for our panelists or for our presenters?
Do you have 2 hands that are up?
So we have a hand by Chiakosi Obukwe and Ngapeli Mchuno. You're welcome to go first, Chiakosi.
Thank you so much. I think my hand was just raised in regards to my question on the terminology piece, which you've addressed. So thank you. Yeah, I think there's a terminology problem. People, as you said, don't understand the term just transition, but when you go ahead to break it down, they then get a sense of what you're talking about. So thank you for addressing the question. That was my only question. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. And then we have a question from, if you could maybe correct my pronunciation, it's Kwapeli.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much. Yes, it's Ngapeli. I'm also from the Human Sciences Research Council, so just want to firstly convey my congratulations to the PCC and the HSRC for great innovative policy centered work. My question is posed to Dr. Roberts, and it probably involves a bit of straightforwarding. Dr. Roberts, on one of the positives regarding the just transition last year was centered around 2 particular key factors: load shedding reducing, which was about 51%, and also electricity prices decreasing. So we've seen extended periods of no load shedding this year. I think we're closing in about 200 days or so of no load shedding. But equally, we've seen a surge in electricity prices. Now, my question is, do you think those two developments may affect the positives that are associated with the just transition, focusing particularly on increasing prices of electricity and reduce load shedding? So it's somewhat of a oxymoron / contradiction. Thank you.
Thank you, Napeli. I think I mean, obviously the load shedding has reduced relative to what it was at the time of surveying. So some aspects of that might be influenced by contextual timing effects, and future iterations of surveying of this type might show that moderates to some degree as a particular just transition concern. But I think certainly not the cost. I think the cost, if anything, is going to become a more predominant concern amongst the public. I think as we can see, the proposals by, for the, the double percentage point increments around energy pricing, given and taking, it in conjunction with increasing economic strain and cost of living crises. I think what the public ultimately wants is indeed a reliable, cost-effective supply. And I think at the moment supply is a little bit better, but it is likely to be variable depending on what part of the country you're in. In addition, there is the cost factor, and that's always been a challenge, and it's becoming more so as as years pass. And so I think if we can give some sense, I think that's part of a communication strategy, and it's also part of the planning around the just transition, is to make sure that whatever solutions are implemented, that aspect of the public agenda is adequately factored in. So yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Thanks so much, Ben. There was a comment by Nokulunga, who suggested that we translate the report to different media formats as well. And Intavi Singh has responded that they are working on existing, videos and vernacular subtitles. And then future videos, we intend to do them in at least 3 languages. So there is work being done on converting traditional reports to more popular media formats.
I might just add to that, Yuri.
Sure.
I think we did ask in a survey about sources of information, and it speaks to the diversity of information streams and sources. And I think we see different parts of the public lean on some more conventional forms. Even the youth have quite a strong attachment to conventional forms, despite their larger share that rely on sort of social media, etc. But I think it speaks to the need for diversified media engagement around these kind of issues, apart from the linguistic aspects.
That's extremely interesting. Yeah, thanks for that. So we won't get Blessing to do some TikToks just yet. Thank you so much to the HSRC team and to our panelists. I'd like to now hand over to Blessing to do the closing for us.
Thank you very much, colleagues. I would really like to thank the HSRC team and the Chief Executive Officer for really driving and supporting this project at the highest level. And the PCC team that worked very well with the HSRC team to also making sure that we get the right answers through the survey. And I can guarantee the participants that some of the questions, the answers you are seeing today, the HSRC team, because they are not in the daily business of climate action, they could not even see them. So we had to guide them. I'm sure that some of the issues you have raised today would continue to fit into future surveys And some won't have to wait for a headline survey. Some would be individual things that I think that the PCC continues to have sleepless night about the continuous engagement, the need to radically improve engagement with the indigenous community, the need to engage more with youth, the balance between talking to those that are daily affected and those that are distant. You can talk to the Mpumalanga people every day, but they don't produce cars. Cars are produced in Gqeberha, so you must talk to Gqeberha too. So we continue to balance the need to outreach. But there is a call, I think, in summary that says we must make sure that everybody that needs to know knows about this report and do something about it. We must simplify it into languages and platform that those that need to understand it. But we must react to it through the right action, whether it's a communication strategy, whether it's an increased outreach, whether it's fair share of the responsibility. NGOs must do their work. Government must do its work in raising awareness, in changing the perceptions. Communities must be told the truth about what the negatives and positives are. So I think that the summary of the feedback we've received here calls for a partnership to respond to this call, not as a propaganda machinery of the pro-climate change, but to respond to our global commitments, our sustainable development needs, and the anxieties of society. And I could conclude by saying we look forward to much more smaller surveys focused with the HSRC, but we also look to a bigger survey of this nature. But there are other people here like the media. The PCC, as I conclude, has done studies like work on the state of the newsroom, stakeholder perception. So we're putting together all these things and saying this is how South Africans are engaging with the issue. And with those words, thank you very much, colleagues. And so even tomorrow, let's continue to engage. Thank you very much and have a great afternoon.
Thanks, Blessing. Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.